Welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I am Farah Kimji, the founder of Futura Funds and the president of Toronto Crew. We are so happy to have all of you join us online for today's signature event. For all of those joining, both members and non-members, the mission of Toronto Crew is that we are dedicated to helping women excel, influence, and lead throughout their real estate careers. And we are committed to this now more than ever before. 2020 was a challenging year for all of us on so many fronts. And we at Toronto Crew were not immune to those challenges. We chose to face those challenges head on by being creative, agile, and adaptive, and innovative. In 2020, we produced over 40 events and we found creative ways to deliver our programs in a new format, including all of our signature events, Real Jobs Day, professional development offerings, community outreach, our mentorship program, and we even formed 2 new committees. Our Past Presidents Committee to act as advisors and provide support to other committees, and our Idea Committee, which I will share more about momentarily. I am proud to say that we are entering 2021 in a very strong position. In 2020, we had over 60 members join our organization. And already as of February, we have 50 new members in 2021. We are also coming to the close of our sponsorship campaign for 2021 with commitments exceeding our 2020 levels, with most of our sponsors returning and many new sponsors coming on board. This year also marks the 25th anniversary of Toronto Crew, and we are very excited to take a look back and celebrate the milestones throughout those years, while looking forward to the next 25 with a renewed sense of excitement as our industry continues to transform and innovate. We have a committee that is hard at work planning an exciting celebration that will take place in the last quarter of the year, so stay tuned. We are also excited to introduce a new offering to our members called Connect 6, which will provide ways for our members to stay connected, engaged, and network in a more intimate and smaller group format. More details will follow in March. Also coming up in March are the following events. Please be sure to register through the website. So I'll just leave those there for a minute for you to look at. I would now like to take a moment to thank our 2021 sponsors as displayed in this presentation. Your sponsorship allows us to deliver relevant, educational, and engaging programming for our members, and we are very appreciative of your support for Toronto Crew. So thank you. And those are our other sponsors. All right, now let's move on to our main event. This event has been organized by our newest committee to Toronto Crew, IDEA, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Allyship. This committee was formed under the leadership of its chair and vice chair, Michelle Hunt and Hannah Ali. The aim of the committee is to foster an inclusive and diverse culture so that all of our members are empowered to excel, influence, and lead in their careers. With a vision to champion the advancement of inclusion, diversity, equity, and allyship so that the Canadian commercial real estate industry becomes more reflective of the communities that we serve. We plan to do this through 5 key initiatives surrounding governance, education, elevating diverse profiles, community outreach, workshops, and events like today's. We know that female entrepreneurs and leaders are incredibly underrepresented in the business world and specifically in the commercial real estate industry. Women get less funding, less attention, and have to face a whole set of hardships and bias that men don't even encounter. Now, when someone is female and Black, or female and a minority, or from the LGBTQ community, the challenges they face multiply. That's why we are so committed to making sure that Toronto Crew is not only a place to uplift women, but also a place to uplift women from a diverse group of backgrounds. In forming the IDEA Committee, one of the ways that we believe we can address this is by highlighting successful leaders from these groups and sharing and amplifying their stories. This became the inspiration behind this afternoon's inaugural signature event organized by our IDEA Committee and brought to you by our signature sponsor, KingSett Capital. And joining us today to share some opening remarks is Anna Kennedy, their Chief Operating Officer and also a past president of Toronto Crew. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Farah, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for taking this time to join us today. I too would like to welcome you to this very important dialogue on inclusion in the workplace. KingSett is very proud to be a sponsor of Toronto Crew, and especially proud to be the presenting signature sponsor of today's event. KingSett is Canada's leading private equity real estate investment firm, which co-invests with institutional and ultra-high net worth clients seeking to provide premium risk-weighted returns through its various fund strategies. KingSett has raised $12 billion of equity for its growth, income, urban, mortgage, and affordable housing strategies, and currently owns interests in an $8 billion portfolio of assets, $18 billion portfolio of assets. We are also fortunate to live in Canada, a diverse and multicultural society that is home to people of all backgrounds and abilities. Ensuring that we include these diverse perspectives and experiences in our various workplaces will improve our industry as a whole and will benefit all. It is up to each one of us to challenge our inherent biases, educate ourselves, and learn from those that are willing to guide us so that we can together build a workplace that is representative of the diversity inherent in Canada. We understand that transforming the self-sustaining systems of inequalities in our workplaces is not something that can happen overnight. At KingSett, we are committed to enabling discussions and actions that challenge the status quo to help us move towards an industry that truly embodies the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We recognize the need as an organization to not just contribute, but to champion the industry in the fight against systemic inequalities in the workplace as well as in our wider communities. It is conversations like today's where we get an opportunity to engage and learn from leaders like Lisa that allow us to continue to build a more inclusive workplace in our industry at large. And we are so pleased to have the opportunity to support this afternoon's program. So thank you very much. I'll now pass it back to Farah, who will kick off the main event.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to KingSett for their continued support of Toronto Crew and this afternoon's event. All right, without further ado, let's kick off the event. We encourage audience members to submit questions throughout using the Q&A feature, and we will open up the floor at 2:50 p.m. To address those questions. So now I will introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Arlene Dieter. Arlene is a director at Colliers Project Leaders and a talented and accomplished project management professional with an extensive background in development, architecture, and construction management, with a proven ability to direct corporate construction and remodeling programs, overseeing multiple multi-million-dollar projects simultaneously. For Arlene, every project is like a puzzle, and the challenge is to put a great project together in the most efficient and cost-effective manner possible. She finds joy in the ingenuity that is born out of the struggle to build within the constraints of time, schedule, and cost. Arlene loves that space between the struggle and the solution that inevitably aligns with the client's business strategy. Over to Arlene, who will now share a land acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farah. So we acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So Lisa, welcome to sunny Toronto. I'm gonna first give off your bio and so hopefully we'll just get started. So I'm very proud and happy to welcome Lisa Wardell of Adtalem, who was appointed the chairman of the board in 2019. She's been president and CEO since 2016 and has been a member of Adtalem's board of directors since 2008. She is the only African-American female chairman and CEO in the S&P 400 index. During her tenure, Lisa has overseen the strategic repositioning of Adtalem's portfolio, successfully acquiring and integrating companies in Adtalem's financial services vertical, and leading turnarounds and divestitures of Adtalem's non-core assets. Under her leadership, gender and ethnic diversity has increased at Adtalem's board to 67%, and within Adtalem's senior leadership to 75%. Lisa has also led the higher education sector in implementing new standards in transparency and financial literacy, and in cultivating quality partnerships to fulfill critical global workforce needs. Her strategic and mission-focused leadership positions Adtalem's global community for sustainable success. Lisa, it's wonderful to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Arlene.
It's good to see you. So we've got a great audience of business leaders, managers, young professionals, and some students. And this is a group of people who believe change is possible in diversity and inclusion and are very interested in hearing from you. So I want to start by taking them through your journey, your career, and then talk about how you became intentional in not only transforming your company for its growth and profits, but I also wanted to talk about how you intentionally changed the fabric of the organization by diversifying your board and leadership team. So Adtalem means to empower. I'd like to start with, could you just tell the group a little bit about your company and what you do?
Absolutely. So Adtalem Global Education exists to provide access to education to those groups and those students and potential students who may not otherwise get that opportunity. And we do that in two places: in medical and healthcare education and in financial services. And so what our mission really is about is assisting those students who are from diverse communities. They are working adults, they are parents. A lot of times they are those students whose life gets in the way, so they're not coming directly through the path of high school, then to first time 4-year degree college, etc. But they recognize in and around their careers that they want to increase their skills, that they want to move their career trajectory, etc. And so we own the largest nursing school in the country, Chamberlain University, and we educate both Bachelor of Science of Nursing as well as lots of degrees at the graduate level. So when we think about diversity and inclusion and how healthcare delivery is changing, think about community health, population health, public health. Those are the types of things. We have 2 medical schools. They're based in the Caribbean. They train students. About 90% of our students come back and do residencies in the US and about 10% in Canada. And then on the financial services side, as we think about the events of the last year, but just in general, the digital economy and how that is changing, the need for financial service professionals on the front line. So those folks that handle all of the issues you have at the bank and you need someone to just fix it. They're being disintermediated and they're needing new skills and certifications as it relates to how banking works with cryptocurrency now and more cybercrime, et cetera. And so we train and certify in that area. So in a nutshell, that's what Adtalem does.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'm going to quote from a speech you gave to a group of young people recently. You said, "Your life and the challenges you overcome are assets in your life." And as we have some students in the audience, I'd like to start our journey with your upbringing. Understanding that you're chairman of the board, president and CEO of Adtalem. You're leading 8 institutions and companies with a presence in 181 different countries, 26 operating campuses, and 6,800 colleagues, as you call them, or employees under your guidance. how did you end up here from, Oxon Hill, Maryland?
Yeah, sure. And 16,000. I think we need a few more than 1,600 to do that.
Okay,
But yes,
60,000.
so I mean, it's really part of the story too about why I do what I do. Adtalem is a public company, but it's also a company that is very driven by social mission. Um, uh, so the reason for that is when I think about my story, I went to high school, as you said, in Oxon Hill, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. Just to give some context there, probably out of 500 or so graduates in each graduating class, maybe 10 to 15 may go to college. So I'm a first generation college grad. This is not a typical feeder into the college system. Luckily for me, I was able to attend Vassar College in upstate New York. I tell this story sometimes. In fact, I probably told it that same time where you got that quote, because when I talk to students, I like them to understand when I applied to Vassar, I applied in pencil. I just filled out the application. I had no idea the way that my kids do now, how to go through that process. And somebody, right, obviously saw something in me in terms of ambition or ability or skill set that allowed me to get into Vassar. Once you're in that path, right, as long as you dedicate yourself and you're determined and you do well, the rest of the story is history. I went on to Stanford Law School, then on to Wharton Business School. And when you and I met, I was the chief operating officer of Bob Johnson's companies. And of course, you and I worked together on a great project. But the reason I tell that story is because two reasons. One, that funnel is just not large enough for the number of people globally, but definitely in the US and Canada who need an education, right? So it works, it's a wonderful story, but it doesn't work for hundreds of thousands of people. So what I'm trying to do is scale that story. And it also didn't start there. My first job was in a tennis shoe store. I ran track. I would work, evenings and weekends. That's really where I learned how a business works. And I didn't necessarily learn from the manager or the owner of that store. I learned from the people who are there, who always know what's going on, but we don't always recognize them as people to listen to. So by way of example, in terms of inventory and invoicing, all these shoes would come in every Friday night, and I've got to get ready for Saturday. And I'm 15 and I'm trying to figure this out. And it's the cleaning lady who says to me, well, literally, she's like, well, which sizes sell the most? Those are the ones that you should put at the front, because otherwise you're going to be looking for a size, 14 in the back, once, and you're looking for a size 8, 58 times, right, in 1 hour. And so those are things that you don't think about, but if you apply that to your life, which I do now, it enables you to get a different lens. So that challenge, right, where I learned not always the manager is the person who has all the information. Now, when I go to my campuses, my nursing or medical school campuses, certainly pre-pandemic and hopefully soon post-pandemic, I put on my running shoes, 5 o'clock in the morning, I go out and run, and I talk to the landscaper, or I talk to the building maintenance, because they're the people who really know what's going on. And then of course I go through the formal meetings during the day where people tell me what they think the CEO wants to hear, which is what happens when you're the CEO. So, those kind of things can be, they're challenges, but they can help you in your journey.
Oh, that's such a great story. I love it. And so let's fast forward. So when we met, Robert Johnson had just sold BET to Viacom for $3 billion. So you're working for the first Black billionaire in the company.
Right.
How did that come about?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, and I'm glad you asked this question. I like to tell the story because people ask me, what was your path, and did you have your Excel spreadsheet of how you were going to become CEO? And the answer to that really, I mean, I wish it was yes. I could just lie and say it was yes, but in actuality, it was absolutely not. What happened is I took advantage of opportunities that came my way, and I decided that I would do things that may be off of my path, right? So at the time, I'm a consultant. I'd gone to business school to be a consultant, done all of the things that you do to get to that place. But Bob was looking for somebody to help him start something new. And I knew, I mean, the joke with my friends used to be, I was EVP of nothing, because I was like, well, I want to be an executive vice president, but there was no company. So they would call me EVP of nothing, right? So you got to be willing to, sort of roll with the punches. But I knew that I could learn so much more, sort of starting from nothing. As you know, I'm literally doing everything from starting the private equity fund to figuring out how to build out an office building, which thankfully you knew about. I did not know about, and I'm juggling them at the same time because we had no employees. Like, it was just, what are we going to build? And I learned a lot from that. So that was the next chapter.
So you're starting to work with Bob. You're learning as you go. You're very adept, and I know how disciplined you are, especially as a runner. And you're traveling all over the place. And you are on a trip in New York with Bob, and you walk into for a meeting because you're looking for capital for an investment. And
you
had a
start
very
fund.
unique experience. So can you tell us about that?
Yes. So that story is widely known because I told it to this Washington Post reporter who loved that story, but it is absolutely a true story. And so so Bob, as you said, who's African-American billionaire, and it's me. And at the time, not only am I a Black woman, but I'm pretty junior. And we were actually, we did want capital, but we were actually starting a hedge fund. We wanted to start a hedge fund, and we wanted to partner at the time, much like commercial real estate and what we're talking about today, there were not, and sadly today, there are not many Black hedge fund, either African-American or African, Afro-Caribbean. There's just not many Black hedge fund managers. And Bob's mandate personally and for RLJ was we wanted to be in businesses where it was hard for Black people to succeed: hotel development, private equity. This was hedge fund. And so we walked into this bank meeting. It's just me and Bob, and they've got all the bankers there. And I think it was either 12 or 14. I think it was 14 bankers, and they were all white males of varying ages and stages within the organization. And I was used to that. I was used to being the only woman, only Black person. That wasn't necessary. By that time in my career, I was used to that. But we went to take our seats, and then Bob just looked at everybody in the room, and he said, "I can't believe you didn't even bring one diverse person in here. You didn't even bring that Black analyst that you roll out, for random meetings that don't have anything to do. You didn't even bring him." And he just cracks up laughing, and I was mortified. I was just sitting there like looking around, and he says, "So over to you, Lisa. Tell them what we're here for." And there was nothing I could do, and everyone's looking down, and they're trying to, mess with their pen, and they're, it's just like this uncomfortable space. And I just launch into, well, here's why we're here, here's why we're qualified, and here's why you should do it with us. And I'm sure I was as red as this shirt, or my glasses, or both. I got through the presentation, and the story ends. We did get the money. We did start this fund. We got two managers, minority managers, to do so. But when we left the meeting, I'm furious with him, and I said, "Bob, why did you do that? Like, that was so embarrassing." And he said, "Because, Lisa, if you don't believe that you belong in the room, you will never belong in the room, and you belong in the room, and they need to listen to you." And so that was that beginning of that journey for me to say, there's really not much after that. Good God, there's not much I can't walk into in a professional setting. And that has served me quite well.
So that's I find that really interesting because
you know Bob, so you know
I
that
know.
is exactly how it happened because you have worked with him before.
Well, I mean, it's that he's continuously challenging you to like step out of your comfort zone and push you in other ways to develop and grow as a business professional. And so, you know, I understand that he suggested that you start to participate on boards. So can you tell us what that was like, being a woman trying to get onto a board and what that was like for you? And then secondly, you also have a personal board of directors. So I'll if you could share that with us as well, that would be great.
Yeah, I will do that. And first I would just say the other thing about Bob, and if you have someone in your life like this, it can be annoying, but absolutely compelling is, I mean, memory like an elephant, right? And so watching him has helped me make some of the relationships and connections. He never forgets a name. He never forgets a face. He never treats anybody differently to anyone else, whether they are, you know, bringing his dry cleaning or signing the document. Like, it makes no difference to him. And I have definitely picked that up from his style, which I think is a good thing. But in terms of the board, unlike a lot of executives and even companies, and it's changing now, but who really feel like they want their executives to focus internally, particularly in that you know, sort of stage in your career where you're still very much learning and, you know, have like a heavy workload. Bob was the opposite. He wanted me to get external inputs so that I could bring more back to my day job. Now, I was actually recruited to then DeVry, now Adtalem, by an executive recruiter. I purposely didn't want Bob to sort of call people and say, hey, I've got this great person to put on a board, because then you're sort of taking a couple of years to make people realize, okay, she really is qualified for the board. But it's interesting, that story is also, I was called by an executive recruiter. The board had one other minority on it. It was a Black male at the time. I mean, it's terrible that I even think of this. I wasn't thinking about researching the board. I didn't know who was on the board. I was just having this conversation. And I noticed two things. Everybody on the board, every time I'd have a conversation, it would go great. They were looking for M&A experience, which I had in spades. They were looking for somebody in Washington who understood the regulatory scene, which you can't work for Bob and not know that. You know, I pretty much audit. I had a degree in finance from Wharton, so it wasn't a hard qualification cell. But two things happened. Every time I would talk to someone, they would say, someone else on the board wants to talk to you. And there's like 8 or 9 people on the board. I'm like, okay, fine. And at that time, it was flying, going to interviews. And then every time I would go, they would say, now, do you know Lyle Logan? And like after the 5th time, I was like, oh, Lyle must be Black. And I didn't know Lyle. I know him now. He's still on the board, but I'm like, it has finally dawned on me why I should know Lyle Logan. Lyle Logan must be African-American. And sure enough, you know, because that's back when we're not Googling, it's 2008. And I'm like, yeah, Lyle's Black. So I finally said, oh yes, I know Lyle. We work in the same professional circles, you know, but so all of these things, of course, things have changed a bit. I got on the board and ultimately became the CEO of that organization. But in terms of the Adtalem board, and for people, particularly women listening to this who have aspirations for a board, I will tell you just one simple thing I tell institutional investors, I tell the proxy firms, I tell, you know, diverse community groups, anybody who asks me, how do you get on a board and why is it so difficult to have diversity on a board? And there's one simple thing. The number one requirement for a public board is that you have prior public board experience. Well, we do not have Black women or brown women or LGBTQ women that have experience on a board. So I simply impose the rocket science of saying, I am going to interview women who do not have public board experience. And I have 4 fantastic women. Well, one of them aged off now, but 4 women. I put 4 women on the board who had never been on a public board before. And what's even more important than that is now they get called for boards all the time, other public boards. And I'm like, hey, don't you trade up my board. Like, it's just a phenomenal, ridiculous part of this systemic structure that we have. And I'm sure there's plenty of examples you have in commercial real estate that's the same way, that prevent really capable people. I mean, these women are so qualified to be on my board. I didn't just say, okay, we need a woman, so let's put her over here and not have her on any committees. They are fundamentally important to our board. But that's all you have. That's all I had to do. That one thing.
Yeah, I mean, systemically, it's just been there so long that if boards just looked at the rules that were keeping the diversity from happening on their boards,
Right.
Because the common thing is, well, there isn't anybody out there. Have you
Right.
looked at what you're looking for?
Right.
So that's
But
all
it's
you got on the board.
not well known though, Arlene. I'll give you one other story and then we can move on. So before the pandemic, so maybe 2 years ago now, I was at a conference and Fortune 200, it had to be 200, if not 100, because it's a big bank. CEO wanted to sit down and talk to me, you know, on one of the networking things. And he said, I'd really like you to be on my board. I said, oh, that's super. I'm actually in financial services in education, but I can't be on your board because I'm on this other board. I'm on Lowe's, and sitting CEOs can only be on one public board according to the proxy firms, which is also an issue.
Okay, I did not know that.
That is true. But then they're saying, but every Black company, every Fortune 500 company should have a Black person on their board, and that person should be a sitting CEO. Well, there's 5 of us. So Marvin's on the FedEx board. I'm on Marvin's Lowe's board. I don't know what board Ken is on, but it's just us. So we're sitting here, and he said, I would like you to be on my board. I said, well, I can't be on your board, but how can I be helpful? Because I want to help other people get on boards. He said, well, introduce me to the other sitting CEOs, Black women of public companies, because I need a sitting CEO of a public company and I want a Black woman. I said, well, here I am. Like I said, I can't be on your board. And he said, true story, he says, you're lying. And I said, well, first of all, I'm not in the business of lying whenever I get a chance to sit down with a Fortune 100 CEO, but actually, no, I'm not. I can tell you about these other really great people I know, you know, but no, don't know any of those. And I actually did, we actually built a relationship. He actually put a Black male on his board who's a technologist who was perfect for his board, not a sitting CEO. But I don't think he said that because he thought I was a liar. He said that because he simply could not get his mind around the fact that I am a unicorn, soon to not be. Roz will be the CEO of Walgreens. But guess what? Roz is on the Amazon board. Roz can't be on anybody else's board. So she can't be anybody else with that problem. And this is the systemic problem that we find ourselves with.
I think you're, just by talking about it, you're raising the awareness of what the issues and the challenges are. I mean, something's got to change, and things need to open up in order for that to happen. So you're on, you're also on Lowe's board. Okay. And okay, so now let's talk about your personal board of directors and mentors, and how, you know, my first most influential mentor was actually a very wealthy, rich, white developer from Virginia. And, you know, my first meetings, you saw us standing side by side, you'd never guess. And yeah, he really influenced and changed my life for the 10 years that he was my mentor. He's now retired. And, but I also have a group of women that I've been, as a core group, that I've been colleagues and champions of each other for the last 20 years now.
Yes.
So tell me about your champions or mentors.
Yeah, so your board of directors, it's not your sponsors, so it's not those people within your organization who speak for you when you're not in the room. It's not your bosses, so nobody on my actual board of directors. I have 8 bosses, even though I'm the chairman, so what? They're still my bosses. But it's people, and the more that you can get diversity within your personal board of directors, the better off. So it's got to be people that have worked with you or seen you in action, who understand you and can also see your potential blind spots, right? So Bob Johnson is on my board. As you know, I ran his companies for 13 years, but also Mac McClarty, who we were in business with in automotive, who was former chief of staff of President Clinton. So understands Washington, understands career trajectory, understands networking at a very, very granular level. Rochelle Parham is on my personal board of directors, who was the chief marketing officer of eBay and rebranded eBay and understands corporate, has since gone on to do private equity and can sort of look at a sort of opportunity set and give you the pros and cons, right? It's not your mom who's just like, you're the best, right? But it's people who are supportive of you, but that can really give you a different perspective. One of my investors who, always gives me, this is what you are thinking about, Miss Social Mission, and we're doing good. And investors like that too, but it needs to be green. And here's how it needs to be green. And here's how you're going to be able to align that. People like that. So I literally have white woman, black woman, white man, 2 white men, black man on my personal board of directors. It doesn't have to be sort of United Nations, but it has to be different. I couldn't have a personal board of directors that's kind of, 5 outspoken, black women, right? Because I already, I have that.
You have that.
So you want to try to, kind of mix it up a little bit. And that takes work, right? Because that takes networking and relationship building that may not have come as naturally to you. The reason that Mac McClarty is on, so we couldn't be more different. He's a white male. I think he's mid-70s. He's very, very wealthy. He has been in business. He's been in politics. The reason I'm very close to Mac is because 15 years ago, he said to me, it's really important to send snail mail. You should send little notelets to people. It matters. And he would send them to me in very beautiful prose. And I started doing that. And every, okay, not as much as him, but every year or so, I would send him a note. Right. And it said to him 2 things. One, she really listened to what I said and cared about my advice, and 2, it helped me to connect and keep in touch with him. So that's one little example, but you have to find those places where it's easy for people to continue that connection and to leave, and you need to leave the right impression. So if that person calls you, they may not talk to you for years, but they say, hey, I want you on the Toronto crew panel. There's one day you get to pick from. This is it. I need you to be there, that you're going to show up.
Right. That's really good. And now I want to be cognizant of time. Your leadership team.
Yes.
You kind of did reworking of the fabric of that as well, to get 75% on your leadership team. And, a lot of people are like, there's not enough qualified people. Are you compromising that you achieved this diversity? Are they bringing in the same numbers? Is it, are people losing out on by you, enabling this? How did you make this work?
Yeah, so a couple of things. It's important to know that I was brought in as CEO in 2016 to achieve a turnaround of the company. The stock had been stagnant for some time. We had an FTC issue that the current management team would not settle. We had missed a couple of quarters. So clearly I was supposed to come and make change. And that was my mandate. But of course, you need time to assess and sort of see what you have, et cetera. So I did a couple of things, and I still have a couple of people who are on my team who were on the team when I became CEO. But what I did was a couple of things. One, I looked at what are the skill sets and the gaps that we have on our management team that's not allowing us to grow for the future. So we had sort of grown up around a couple of different companies. It's a portfolio of companies, and they were either not the right companies or they were getting all the focus, and we needed to sort of consolidate and streamline and be more efficient. And so I had an opportunity from just a job description skill set perspective, that there were people that they were fine for the organization when it was $500 million organization. When it became a $2 billion organization, they didn't have the skill sets. So that gave me the gaps, and I was very transparent, and treated people very well on the way out of the door. You don't, treat people poorly because the business has changed, right?
Right.
That's not really performance. And then with the executive recruiters and HR and the searches, I just did two things. One, I demanded diverse searches, which sometimes can take longer, sometimes mean a lot more interview time for you as the CEO and for your team. It could mean a lot of different things, but you're not getting the same old candidates from an external perspective. And from an internal perspective, which I think probably is the most important for this particular audience, is internally, I just established this why not. So what tends to happen is it's not that the minority person, the Arlene, doesn't get picked. It's that, I'll just use John. John Doe does get picked. So it's not a vote against you. It's a vote for someone that they can connect with on different levels than they can connect with you. So the why not is, okay, I think John's great too. And here's these 3 avenues and opportunities. His career has been progressing and he's been here since X or whatever it is. But why not Arlene? If you could answer that question, you may be able to. They can never answer that question, by the way. Then I'm good. But if you can't, then we're going to go there first. And you should know you've got to be brave and courageous as a leader to do that, because you're not always going to make the right decision. Sometimes you're going to make the wrong decision. If you make the wrong decision with John Doe, it's cool. John Doe, it didn't work. If you make the wrong decision with Arlene, you're a complete idiot because you don't know how to pick talent, which is the number one, skill requirement of a leader. So you just have to be willing to own that and remind people that it's visible because I did something different and I did something brave. And by the way, I ought to, because Arlene deserved that. So it's the why not internally.
That's great. So you're continuing to challenge status quo. And in light of everything that's happened in 2020, which was a year that brought about unprecedented change.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a global awakening happening in the US with everything that's happened.
Yeah.
And it's truly a watershed moment, creating awareness around health, wellness, diversity, inclusion. And you made another shift. And I bring this up because the shift happened for me too. Like for the first time, I've become more outspoken about just remaining silent and a want for change. And you've done this both internally in your organization and externally. And how has it impacted your organization internally as you start to have this discourse with your people? And then I'll ask you externally.
Yeah, so internally, for me, like many CEOs, the George Floyd murder was the first time that I spoke out specifically in and around racial justice. Not that I hadn't, obviously we've been doing on the diversity march and inclusion for years and years and years. But prior to that, anytime there was any sort of issue, obviously we know George Floyd was not the first. My comms team would come and say, we believe in diversity. And I was like, yeah, I'm not saying that. Let's just not say anything. Cause that's like saying, give me a piece of candy. Like that doesn't help. Yeah. But when the George Floyd thing happened, actually what happened to me was which I think happened to a lot of people, but particularly Black folks, it hit me personally because I had an 18-year-old upstairs, not even at school, right? Because it's a pandemic. So he's upstairs. I have an 18-year-old with like an afro this big, right? Who's just getting his driver's license. And I've got one in college, and they're angry and they don't understand what's going on. And I'm saying to them, don't drive the car this week because, and I'm just thinking, I can't be in this perch and not say something. And so my message was it was actually sort of a love letter from a mother more than anything else. And the response from my employee group in terms of, the fears of Black parents and, just the understanding from folks who just never understood some of these issues. I mean, we had a town hall and I talked about how every time my sons leave the house, I make sure that their driver's license is in the middle console of the car, not in their wallet. And I tell them why, and, that kind of thing. And it just opened a different dialogue internally that clearly people were starving for. And that doesn't mean everybody has the same, viewpoint by any means, but I think it opened this ability to have the conversation and the level of understanding. And then I think externally, it was really good for us as Adtalem, but I think just in general, because these are things, the healthcare inequities and the, communities with food deserts and communities that just don't have access to education, and, proprietary education just gets beaten up, but nobody has any alternative to that. It allowed us to tell our story just much more proactively and in a positive way. And I feel like as a Black CEO, I just have to be able to be bolder, because I would imagine it's hard as a white CEO to be bold on these things. And then you got to speak on things where you can't say, as a Black mother or whatever the case may be. I felt like I had the responsibility to be bolder. And I think it's helped, not just me, but I think obviously the community of CEOs has helped with that.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where when you hear something like that happen, or, somebody puts out an alert on television and they're looking for a young Black male wearing a gray hoodie, you're like starting to call, your brother, your husband,
Yes,
your son,
right.
you're just worried. That's a reality that we live with, but I think it was spread and shared with the world. So, from my understanding, this was a seminal moment.
Yeah.
For leaders to understand others, where other people, at least for me, others are, women, Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ2, like we're all others now. And those challenges that were visible or invisible are now becoming visible.
Right.
And that group is getting bigger and louder. And it's not enough just to say you're supporting diversity. We're asking leaders for more. And so what advice would you give to leaders or those going into positions of leadership when challenged to take a position on diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. So look, and I think there's a couple of pieces. I think one of the most important things that we can do as leaders, and frankly, just as people in the community, is to break this notion or this barrier that that racism or racist acts or structural racism means that you are morally bad, right? And so changing this conversation to, in order to not be racist, we must be anti-racist, right? So Stamped from the Beginning, and some of those books that Cast, and some of those books that folks are reading in and around these discussions help us, because until as individuals we can say that demonstrated implicit bias, but that doesn't mean I'm a racist or a bad person or horrible, or that demonstrates that I don't understand this issue about transgender, but that doesn't mean that I'm until we can break through that barrier, which I believe is now, the discourse is changing that way. I even see it with mainstream CEOs, like they're like, I need help. here's what I need, in a very, very different way, I think then we can start to really build the solutions around diversity and inclusion. Because I guess, not answering your question, but just a slightly different issue, I am concerned that we're going to get all of this diversity inflow, right? People are hiring, and then, we're going to look up a couple years from now and those folks are no longer there. We see it in investment banks. We see it certainly in architecture, there's no question. We see it across industries because there's no support and there's no inclusion to the D. It's funny, when I started in 2016, I was like, stop saying D&I, because until we have some people to include, you just need to focus on diversity. Now, we have moved from that, but that whole sense of belonging and what's inclusivity, it can't just be like the affinity group or the town hall. It has to be within and structural within the organization. And frankly, that's where, my sort of focus is going to be here. And as I move forward, because I do have this concern that we're not going to be able to maintain it. If you look historically, people are focused, and then, we're still back to, 4 CEOs in the Fortune 500, 19 in the history of the Fortune 500. We're not systemically solving the problems the way that we are systemically putting the problems in place.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be a real intentional framework,
right?
That needs to be established both internally and externally for people personally. So we've got a bunch of questions that have come in. Okay. And Farah, I'm going to let you've been reading them, so I'll let you toss them out to Lisa.
Sure, sounds good. Okay, so we've got 3 here. We'll see how many we can get through. The first one is, what was the most important thing you did for yourself that set you up to be successful?
I would say that I gave myself permission and grace to be, my daughter's name is Grace, so not that Grace, and grace to be a fabulous, amazing mother on some days and a mediocre CEO, and a fantastic CEO on other days, and a, fair to middling mother. And until I did that, I was under constant internal warfare. And luckily for me, I did it when my sons were younger. And I think that is probably what set me up for overall success. Obviously, there's lots of different professional things, but I would say in terms of that connection between personal and business, that's what I did. What's next for me? I have lots left to do at Adtalem. We just did a big acquisition, and so integrating that and really driving the face of healthcare education. But I would love to be continuing to sort of fight this fight and sort of build awareness within the corporate community for diversity and inclusion, more than sort of this is the end topic, but more this is how we're going to structurally reconstitute how we think about how this country, and in fact globally, we do business.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, next question. Can you speak to how adding diversity on your board has contributed to the efficacy of the board and brought value to your organization?
Yeah, so for us, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I didn't get to talk about it when I first talked about the board. Our student population, the students we serve, are just really, really diverse. And so being able to, so I'll give you an example. Let's take funding and financial aid. These are not students typically who have they're not students who have a 529 plan, or in the case of my sons, are parent pay, right? And so so a big piece of their struggle is managing financial aid, et cetera, et cetera. So when we add, and that's not to say that people who are non-diverse don't have financial aid, but when we added to the board, in particular, I'm thinking of I'm first generation, but 2 other minorities or black male and a black female, who very accomplished in their careers, but first generation college students understood that the FAFSA form to get in the US, the Title IV, similar in Canada by a different name, is far harder than applying to the actual college application. And we're able to think about how do we put those guardrails around the potential applicants, right? They have a wealth of information for us that frankly our faculty and our admissions people just don't have that lens. That's just one example, but we see it over and over and over again as we think through how do we look at this problem from our end customer, which for us is two folks, our students and then the hospitals and the financial services companies that employ them.
I like that question in your answer, because I think in real estate as well, right, we serve diverse communities, right? Whether it's where they work or where they live. And so, in order for us to serve them best, it really is important for our companies and our boards and our leadership teams and decision makers to be from a diverse subset, right?
Right.
Okay, I like this question. It's next up. Do you have any examples of teaching aha moments that you've sort of had with someone from a majority population? So where they just were like, oh, I didn't know that. And
oh gosh.
like,
yeah.
So
a couple. So one, in my Adtalem tenure, I don't always sit in on vendor meetings, but I do make sure that our vendor and service providers have diverse teams. That's like a easy one that you can do as a manager. And so every once in a while I'll sit in, and I was sitting in on a marketing presentation. It was a white male. He had, I think 3 women with him. And they were talking about, it's a woman-owned firm. I think it was actually his mother who started this firm, and they went through the whole pitch. And he'd obviously been, as people do warn my vendors and service providers, that I like to talk about the diversity. And he said, I know you like diversity. So I brought a picture. It's a true story. I brought a picture of our team. I want you to see how diverse it is. And he holds up the picture. There's probably 60 people. It's like a small family. And we like to use, smaller vendors. And it's him, maybe 2 other white guys. And it's 60 white women. And I said to him, and my whole team was there, and I said to him, that's awesome. I said, when you look, your lens is you have women, a lot of women in your organization. When I look at that picture, I just see you do not have one person of color that works for you. It's the same picture, but that's how we have to think about the diversity lens. And I try to sort of say it nice, but probably didn't come across nice. So that would be an example of that, more to sort of help my team understand that it needs to be broader. It needs to be a broader conversation. Not that I have nothing against women-owned organizations, but trying to help people understand that there's just more than one lens, and you'll hear me use that word lens a lot. One thing that came up actually so we've been having town halls on the racial justice and social justice and what's the difference. And what's interesting to me is sometimes you don't realize your own lens. So I was telling this story thinking that everybody knew this. And I said, or that this happens. And I said, it's like for Black people, when you're getting your house appraised, you have to remember that morning to take all the pictures of all the Black people, all the photographs off of the wall, because you get a lower appraisal. I mean, you guys are in real estate, you know these things, a lower appraisal if there's Black people on the wall, right? So I was using that as an example for something else. I said, so everyone knows that. Apparently nobody knows that except for me and like 3 other people. And I was getting all these emails, and my team were like, oh my gosh. And I got a couple that said, we didn't believe you. We Googled it. It's really true. Like there's percentage differences. And I was like, all Black people know,
Yeah.
right? And so we've got to get to more of these conversations of, there's probably a whole bunch of stuff that all people who, from Middle East know, or all people from Hong Kong know. I wouldn't know those things. That's what I want to learn. I want to have that learning agility. And that's what I look for in other people. But those are just 2 examples, but I mean, I could give you examples all day.
Yeah, I know I had a moment one time where I was hosting a board meeting, and the CEO of the company walked in sort of by accident. It was a board meeting for another real estate group that I was on a committee for. And he walked in by accident, and then later I saw him in the day, and he said, "Oh yeah, you've got a lot of women within your committee." And I said, "Well, there was 3 out of 11." Right? So it was just like, for him,
Right.
that's the lens.
That's too many, Farah. Too many. Yeah.
And, you know, he kind of laughed, and he
Right.
said, back in my day, it was like 1 or none. Like there just wasn't, right? So we all have these lenses. I remember sitting there being like, there needs to be more women at this
Right.
table and more diversity. I was the only person of color there, right? So
Right.
it's very interesting. We all do have these lenses.
Yeah.
I think we're out of time.
We are. I know I could keep
Well,
going.
We could keep you all day. So I'd like to thank you for taking us through your journey from Oxon Hill, Maryland to Chicago. Chairman of the board, president, I'm so proud of you. I love your leadership style. I'm following you on LinkedIn, so you'll probably get a lot more followers. But on behalf of Commercial Real Estate Women and the IDEA Committee, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me. It was super fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Arlene, as well. You did a great job, and we'd love to have you back anytime. But thank you for this conversation, and thank you to all the audience members for joining us today. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks.